Welcome to our June 2022 episode of In Search of Civility. I am Kelly Packer, and I'll be moderating today's discussion with my co-host, Jeremy Field. Before we introduce our guests, let me share with you a bit of background on In Search of Civility. The series is an innovative partnership between the Association of Idaho Cities and the Boise Metro Chamber. We started this series in January 2021 and remain committed to discussing the challenges facing our state and communities. In Search of Civility believes in the idea that truth exists and cannot be found without a sincere exchange of ideas. Civility in our discourse, we believe, is the necessary grease for advancement and preservation of relationships, institutions, and society. To agree, one must first disagree well. Listening actively to key stakeholders, giving your political opponents respect, the benefit of the doubt, empathy, and sympathy for their motives. Ultimately, civility gives us the opportunity for our own ideas and notions to change, bringing improvements to our own lives and even society as a whole. We believe civil dialogue can affect great change, which is why we strive to help important conversations take place. These conversations are not possible, however, without the help of our partners. Thank you to our media partners, Idaho Ed News, the Idaho Statesman, the Idaho Press, and the Idaho Capital Sun. They provide us with a platform and audience with whom we can interact. Joining us today are two special guests from the Sheriff's Association and from the Firefighters Association. Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit more about our guests today?
I would love that. Our first guest is Rob Shoplock. Rob has been serving the citizens of Eagle for more than 20 years, and he is currently the battalion chief of the Eagle Fire Department. Outside the firehouse, Rob is the president of the Professional Firefighters of Idaho and has been a member of the lobbying team for over 15 years. At home, he's married to his beautiful wife, Kelly, of 22 years, and has 4 amazing teenage daughters. We were joking around before, that's why he doesn't have any hair anymore. Rob loves doing his medical missions in Kenya and currently serves on the board of directors for Expansion International, a nonprofit committed to serving people and spreading the gospel in Kenya. His hobbies include rock climbing, skateboarding, and fishing. So, Rob, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, our second guest is Jeff Lavey. Jeff is a retired law enforcement officer after 35 years of service. He served for several law enforcement agencies, but his most recent role was serving as the chief of police in Meridian from 2007 to 2021. He has a bachelor's degree in management and organizational leadership and is a graduate of the National FBI Academy with a class of 240. His stellar career and skill sets landed him in a new role where he's still serving within the law enforcement community in our state. Currently, Jeff is the executive director of the Idaho Sheriff's Association and has served in that role for the past 16 months. He was retired for a total of 2 days before he took on that role. So I've heard that a lot from a lot of talented retirees. They tend to get sucked back in, just like Godfather Part 3. But we're glad you're there, Jeff. Also, he's an active member and founding member of the Back the Blue Idaho group, where their mission is to offer thankfulness and honor those who every day sacrifice for our freedom. He's married to his wife, Lynn, and they have 2 boys, Jordan, 21, and Braden, 18. 4 golden retrievers share the house with him. Jeff is definitely a dog lover, which is perhaps why he served as a canine handler in 2 separate agencies over his law enforcement career. Jeff says that his canine partners were the best partners he ever had. Jeff also loves the winter for skiing and the summer for surfing and wakeboarding. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks, Jeremy and Kelly.
I would echo what Jeremy said. Thank you so very much for both of you being here. We're excited to explore with you a little bit of your world and how civility can be impacted there and ways that everyone can work together for a better civil environment, especially during emergencies. To kick off, I'm going to start with you, Jeff, and Rob, then I'll have you answer the same question. Idahoans rely on first responders to perform their duties effectively and make sound judgments in response to highly stressful, life-threatening situations often. Over the course of your career, have you seen a change in the way Idahoans have supported or treated you?
Kelly, let me first start back with my law enforcement career, which started in Washington State. And so I can tell you that where it started and where it ended is is a wide spectrum. It seems like when we first started law enforcement, it was highly respected position. Our our word meant something, and people called you when they needed you, and were grateful that you showed up. Um, and so I don't want to say that things have changed because of Idaho, because we've seen a change across the nation over the last 4 or 5 years. And law enforcement now is looked upon as kind of a black sheep of the family, is looked on negatively. Um, our word no longer means anything. Everything has to be questioned. Facts are disputed. It used to be facts actually meant something, and now um, facts people overlook, and they just have their own thoughts processes. But our biggest problem that we're facing is that on the national realm, we're being um, put in one group. And over the last several years, we've had some unfortunate incidences, some negative incidences in law enforcement that even law enforcement opposed. Um, but they want to put this title on everybody and say everybody's this way. And we're finding that 99.9% of the employees in law enforcement are not the way that they're being portrayed. And so we have seen a big difference over the last 4 or 5 years in all states, not just in Idaho.
Thanks, Jeff. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I was kind of just taking some notes on this question on how things have changed. And really, the job has changed so much over the last 25 years that I've been involved in the fire service and EMS. I think the community has supported the changes that we've done. When I started, we were just kind of a fire and EMS system. And as a country and as a state, have hit things like where we went through the anthrax scare after 9/11, terrorism, school shootings, obviously, COVID lately, the job's changed. I think the community for us has embraced the change because as these new things happen, we're trying to be more proactive than reactive. So we're in the schools talking to the teachers, at the PTA meetings, discussing, what our role is in that, which is a little bit different than law enforcement. And so I think that we have seen the support from the communities. Our biggest challenge is being proactive and not reactive with the citizens.
I like that. Maybe, we definitely here we're talking about a national kind of a way that people perceive first responders. And we've seen a lot of high profile stories at that level detailing tense relationships between communities and first responders. How do you feel these stories compare to your professional experience here in Idaho specifically? And what would you attribute any differences to?
I can start that, and I kind of alluded to the fact that things have changed over the last 4 or 5 years with some of the high-profile negative incidents in law enforcement. And what was unique to us here in Idaho, and through my experience, is that our communities knew that we weren't that way. They respected us. They had trust in what we do, and the unbelievable amount of outpouring of thanks and food and treats that showed up at the department was just unbelievable. And they were saying thank you for what you do, and did not put us in that same category on the national front. And so it really goes back to like Rob said, the proactive service that you do in your community and that trust that you have in your community, and not letting that bubble break. But we've had some really good contacts here in Idaho.
That's good to hear. Rob, what are your impressions?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think in general, the public, their outpouring, when they come to the firehouse and the stations, they're truly grateful and thankful that we're there. I think the one thing that has changed over the last 20 plus years just in Idaho is a tremendous amount of growth. So when people come from other states, they're coming here with what they knew from, let's face it, most of our growth comes from Washington, Oregon, and California. So they're coming here with one mindset and one expectation. And we've really gone from the small communities where everybody knew everybody to a whole new group moving in. And a lot of the people that are coming are retired first responders and law enforcement. So they're talking to their neighbors about how it was where they came from, not necessarily what is happening in the communities here. And that's where I think it's sometimes it's a struggle. So I think we're trying to get out on top of that, to be, like I said before, at those HOA meetings and things like that, explaining to the public what to expect from us. And then we work together, teaming up with them. So when we do have issues or differences, we can work those out, not necessarily on an emergency scene, but again, prior to something happening.
I think that's amazing. And I think you both make some really good points. I love hearing that Idaho maybe has not followed the exact trend of the national. I mean, I believe that. I held that as my belief, so I was grateful to hear you say that, Jeff. But I do agree that we have seen some major growth, and that growth can negatively impact sometimes, because as you mentioned, Rob, it colors their opinion of what maybe to expect because of where they came from. I think that's a really valid point. So with that being said, knowing that maybe the numbers are a little bit smaller here, but that there maybe still are some things that could be done and things, and Rob, you've alluded to it a little bit with some of the HOA and school meetings, but what are some things that first responders can do to improve their relationships with Idahoans? And then conversely to that, what can Idahoans do to improve the relationships and interactions with their first responders?
Well, Kelly, let me just say one thing, touching on what we just talked about before too, is that we've had to remind people that have moved into this area, that have come from other states, about they need to remember why they left that state in the first place. And when they realize that I moved to Idaho to get away from some of that stuff, is that then you need to work collaboratively with them to make sure that Idaho doesn't turn into some place that they're escaping from. So we've had to do that a few times there. But going back to your question, it seems that we have gotten to the point where you can't even disagree. You can't even have a discussion and have opposite views. If you don't have my views, then you're wrong no matter what.
Right.
And it really is turned into an us versus them sort of approach. And that is definitely not something that we want in law enforcement. And I've seen that a little bit, where it's almost like law enforcement thinks they're at war with their citizens. And I go, really? But it really goes back to being respectful. And you can't demand respect, you have to earn respect. And if you are respectful to people, then in return, you would hope that they're respectful to you. What I used to tell my officers when I was dealing with them is ask yourself how you want to be treated. If you were calling the police and the police came to your house, how would you want to be treated? And the best approach is what sort of expectations would you have for a police officer visiting your grandparents? How would you expect them to act? And that's how you should act. And so I think that's probably the biggest start for us, is realizing that we all are unique. We all do not think the same, but we got to start with just being respectful and being open-minded and listen to all sides.
Great. Rob, do you have anything to add?
What's that, Kelly? Sorry.
Asking if you had anything to add. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great point. I think the one positive that's come from maybe the last 5 to 10 years of what has happened is, as I've seen, that emergency responders in general have become a closer knit community. We work a lot closer now with our sheriff's deputies than we did 20 years ago. And one thing that I think is super important, and I preach this all the time to whether they're the people that work under me or just as an organization as a whole, and I'll attribute this to a fire commissioner that we had. He wrote a book called The Top of the Spear, or The Tip of the Spear. His name's Kevin Kerr. And if we always put citizens on top, whether it's going into a meeting or whether it's negotiations for a contract for work, whatever it is, as long as the citizens are up top and everything funnels that way, we're going to be successful in the plans that we put together. And I think that's something that I really think is starts with fixing those relationships or interactions is like Jeff says, treat every call like you're going to a family member. And for years we've said, hey, we're going to Mrs. Smith. And Mrs. Smith is a fictional character, but every 911 call is a Mrs. Smith. And we're going to treat her with the utmost respect. And we're going to always put empathy as the number one thing that we want to make sure that we portray to the community, is that we understand that there's a problem and we do truly care about them.
So along with that then, because I think those are great observations and great tools that you guys have assessed for yourselves. But what about in reverse? What are the things that maybe you would hope from the Idahoans that are going to be interacting with first responders? Are there things that maybe those that watch this show could remember and that might be an aha moment for them that they don't know, that you would maybe recommend?
Well, Kelly, I will share with you a story, because I think we all like stories. And in Meridian, we actually went to a body-worn camera program far earlier than when it was recommended by the Department of Justice. And one of the reasons why I went to that was to show everybody what we do out there. And even our officers go, don't you trust us? What are you trying to find? Are you trying to find us doing something wrong? And I said, no, I want proof to our citizens about how good of a job that you do out there. And where the story comes in is the first year that we implemented that in Meridian, our officer complaints dropped 67%.
Wow.
Because they realized that they were now being recorded. And it's sad that we have to get to that point, but nobody wants to look dumb on film. And those that do look dumb on film, once they realized that they were recorded, no longer had a complaint, because they were just hoping that it didn't show up on the news. And so that from our citizens is just going to realize, they just have to realize that, we're human too. And you called us to the scene to help you. And we're not the bad guys here. And also to keep in mind is that, a good friend of mine in law enforcement in leadership said, your microphone is always on. And you need to realize that as a law enforcement officer, you're being recorded video and audio at any time. And if you're not, you're just lucky. But the citizens also have to remember that in today's standards, is that the chances of you doing something and it being caught on film is highly likely. And so if that's what it takes for you to act more decent, then do that. But it goes both ways.
Great reminder. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, 10% of our citizens generally are the ones who are calling 911 for help. So we have that other 90% that we got to get the message out to. But I like Jeff's comment about we're being watched right now. And I looking across the room, as you said before, I had 4 teenage daughters, which meant that as they hit those teenage years, cameras went into the house to make sure that the house was safe while we were gone. So we are always being watched. And I think that mentality that we really try to portray in the firehouse is, I am for we and we are for them, meaning I'm for my crew and my crew is for the community. And how do we bring those two resources together? I think partnering with other groups outside, and I think the Red Cross is one that has done a lot to come in, do things like smoke detector programs. So when we do go to communities and knock on doors, we are proactive in working with other groups to build a safer community. Now, I know law enforcement does that a lot as well. We in Eagle do a lot of events with the Eagle Police Department, which is part of the Ada County Sheriff's Department. But us working together and sharing our resources to help build that safer community is important. Recently we opened up a fire station in Hidden Springs, and that was a collaborative effort between the North Ada County Fire District and the Eagle Fire Department. But what I think people don't understand is a lot of times they're like, as you know, the house prices are going through the roof. So people see their taxes as like, hey, this is going to be a hit to my taxes. And the one thing I think people don't maybe understand is that your insurance is tied to public safety as well. So as we staff that station, people's homeowners insurance comes down. And I think those are messages that like we are an essential part of the community, and it factors into what it costs to live here. So I don't know, I'm kind of going off on a side tangent, but I think we can do a better job on pushing that out and explaining, why we do have a law enforcement office tied into our fire station, and that is for to build that safer community together.
I like that. I really like you talking about making sure that, because you're kind of, in small business language, you're talking about always keeping the client first. When you talk about having the citizens be the point of the spear there, the most incredible business leaders always talk to the most incredible business leaders always.
I'm going to mute myself for a second.
No, you're good. Don't worry. The most incredible business leaders talk about how when they put their clients first, then they put their things work out. It's when you put profits and other goals ahead of the people that you serve, ultimately you're organized for that. So I really appreciate that. Are there ways, and you talked about with the fire station, but what are some of the ways that you, Jeff, your organization, when you're putting the citizens first and want to have that, what do you do to make sure that the citizens and their safety are first, and how does that impact how law enforcement handles situations on the ground?
Well, Jeremy, first let me say that that was not one of my 4 golden retrievers. So. Meridian was kind of unique in that years ago we realized that we needed to work together with our other public safety partners, and everybody else to kind of follow suit. If you look at any city budget or any county budget, public safety is the highest expense out there. And we realized that it comes with a tremendous price tag. And so we learned to work with our fire services right off the bat. And it's one team, one mission, serving our citizens at their time of need. And we work really, really well together. And in this valley, we have seen the law enforcement and the fire and the EMS all come together with that same mentality. It's one team, one mission, serving our citizens. And we just have to constantly remind ourselves about why we're there and what we're supposed to do, because we don't build widgets. Our widget is service. And the one thing that we need to remember is the only reason we exist is because the cities or the counties, the citizens in those cities and counties allow it. They want law enforcement there. If they didn't want law enforcement there, they would get rid of the charters and it would be gone. And so we need to remember why we're there in the first place. We're there for the citizens, serving the citizens, and we can't get away from that.
I appreciate that. Rob, did you want to add anything else?
No, I agree 100%. I think when you see a police graduation or a fire graduation, it's a big deal. We make a big deal out of it. And I think what people maybe sometimes don't remember or they'll forget is when we put our hand up and we take that oath. I go to work every day, as does my crew that I work with, and we know that at any moment we may die serving the community, and we're okay taking that risk. I think it's something that we take very seriously. I know my partners in law enforcement take it very seriously, but we care about the citizens, and we know that we're ready to do the ultimate sacrifice to make sure they're protected. So it is tough sometimes, I think, when maybe that is forgotten. And I agree that there's a lot of stress in the jobs, but I want our citizens to know that we do care about each and every one of them, whether they're living here full time or whether they're visiting, that we're willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that their services, their needs are met.
I love. Thanks for letting me take a little aside there. It's. I love when we touch on just principles that apply to multiple facets of life. Whether it's business or our personal lives, when we focus on the people that are most important in our circles, other things can get worked out when we have the focus on where it should be. I love that that's a principle in business as well as in law enforcement and for other first responders. It's something to think about when we hear those messages. But touching a little bit more on this. It is a stressful job. It's not easy. And what tools or resources do your associations have to help first responders manage the turmoil and stress related to your careers? And can Idahoans contribute to those resources?
I don't, Jeff, if you don't mind me kicking off just a little bit with
No,
that.
go ahead.
One of the, I don't know if we're afraid to get some information out, and I just want to use this as an example. Over the last tour that I worked, I think I had heard more overdoses from fentanyl in the last few days than I've probably heard in months. And that's usually when a bad batch of fentanyl comes in. But I think in my tour I might have gotten called to 7 overdoses around the area. And you don't see a lot. People use social media to post happy things that are going on in their life. And I think working together to make people aware of how dangerous stuff that is coming through, and we're going to experience that as a growing community, as is the valley and the state. But working together, if we can get the message out, especially to our kids, and I talked to each one of my daughters and said, do not take something that somebody might give you that they said, hey, this is okay to try, because it only takes that one time. And as we want to work with businesses and communities, I think we actually do need to talk about the bad stuff that is going on, and not just the good stuff like, hey, we're doing smoke detectors, but hey, there's a bad batch of fentanyl that has come into the community. Everybody be aware at this time that it's never a good time to do drugs, but especially now when we're seeing, 7 overdoses in a 12-hour period. That's significant. And you don't see any of that stuff getting talked about, and we need to do a better job. And I say we, as an emergency service community, working with our business partners to remind everybody that something's out there that's horrible, and these are the consequences of these things.
Wow. I want you to tell the chamber when that happens. We'll put it out on our socials. That's just something you want your kids to know. That's a big deal. I appreciate that perspective.
Yeah.
Jeff, you were ready to contribute to that topic too. What did you want to say?
I was just going to say is we don't do a good enough job in public safety in allowing people to be vulnerable and to deal with their mental health and such. And some people think it's just a part of doing the job. And when I started in law enforcement, it was like suck it up and move on sort of approach. And so we've really worked hard over the years, and Rob and I have been involved in legislation on post-traumatic stress injuries, peer support, really trying to get resources out there to help our first responders. And we're doing a much better job of it. But the fire services have really done a great job in crisis management and CISM teams and having debriefs when bad stuff happens, and law enforcement kind of got on their coattails with that. And then we've realized over the years that we're to no benefit to our citizens if we are not okay ourselves, and we need to make sure that our staff is taken care of, so then they can provide the ultimate service to our citizens. And so I still think we have a ways to go on that, but we're definitely trending in the positive arena.
Yeah. So what, to go maybe a little more detail though, when you talk about these things and seeing 7 overdoses of fentanyl in 12 hours, and you see the stuff that impacts you as a human being, even though I know you need to learn how to disassociate with the ugliest parts of your job that can be very you deal with on a regular basis the darkest side of human character, the tragedies in our communities. What kind of stuff is out there so that we as citizens have a better idea of the resources that you have to take care of yourselves professionally and personally?
I don't know that there is a decent amount of resources out there, and I don't know if even if there was, if everybody that needed it would reach out to it. I can vividly picture things in my head that I saw 35 years ago, and I don't know why I've been able to deal with it as I went through my career and stuff, and why it impacts other people differently. But when the lights go down at night, there's things that go on in any city, not just this city, that people have no idea what happens. And it really goes back to, on the overdose issue, is if you remember back when meth hit real hard for the first time, and if you see the ingredients that goes into making meth,
All poison.
and knowing people put that into their bodies, it's just unbelievable. And then looking at how it affects the bodies when they got the pock marks and the hallucinations and the odor coming from their skin, I just can't comprehend why people would put that in their bodies. Now, fast forward to today, is we got fentanyl out there now, and it takes a micro dose of fentanyl to be lethal. And the problem is that they're putting this into everything, pills, they're lacing it in marijuana, anywhere that they can join, and people are taking this, and it's playing Russian roulette, because there's no oversight of this, and there's no proper dosing and accredited labs that are making this stuff. And so all it takes is one time, and it could be, your day could be ending today, or it could be ending next week or a year from now. It's just whatever the odds are. And knowing that it is probably the most lethal thing that we've seen in our careers, yet people are still putting in their bodies, I can't comprehend that. Maybe Rob has some additional information or thoughts on that, but it's heartbreaking how many overdoses we have that are drug related, fentanyl related here in just the Treasure Valley.
Yeah. I do think, to your point, Jeff, stuff has changed so much over the last 20 years, and social media definitely has impacted that. Not just, all our kids have Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, all these different things. The peer pressure on teenagers today is far greater than it was when I was a teenager. I think so that then goes into doing stuff you might not normally do because they're seeing it on the web or something like that, without knowing the hazards. And like you said, if people read the label, they would never put that stuff in their body, at least not consciously knowing. I do think it's a different time. It is expensive to live in the state now, and we have two parents that are both working to make ends meet. Kids are spending more time on their own. I couldn't fathom 25 years ago when I started the amount of teenage suicides that I've been on since, go back 25 years to today, and that peer pressure, the bullying. I think that's as a community, whether it's with the business community, police and fire working together, is to get out and get in front of that and let people know that it's okay to be you, and you don't have to fall into the peer pressure, and then handling the bullying, which then again leads to people trying drugs, hanging out with a different crowd, and ultimately suicide, not knowing what the consequences of that are. It's just heartbreaking. To this day, when I go on young teenagers, even preteens that are overdosed or attempted suicides, it's heartbreaking to know that, how did we miss that? and you the empathy for the mom and the dad, or maybe it's a single parent, just the guilt that they're holding that their kids did this, and just explaining like, you're human. There's only so much you can do, but we together can do more. And I think that's what I love about when Kelly talked to me about this discussion is, let's, how do we be a better Idaho? How do we be a better community? It's working together and hoping to educate. And again, back to what I said it's let's be proactive and not reactive in our communities.
Absolutely. We need to learn to give each other a little bit more grace, don't we, in every aspect? Because as you mentioned, we're all humans. And Jeff, you mentioned the same thing. We're all humans. We're all going to make mistakes or not have our best day sometimes. And if we could just give each other a little bit more grace through that and not try to darken another's world, but brighten it, it would be so wonderful. There are a couple of comments and questions in the comment section that I want to highlight here right now. Mark Hemble said, in the last several years, I have noticed first responders prefer not to live in the communities they serve. How does the situation keep first responders respectful of the communities they actually serve in? Any comment on that before we go to the others?
Well, Kelly, I'll comment on that. It's an interesting question, and I actually do agree in that if you're not invested in your community, then what sort of actions are you going to portray in that community? So I get where you're coming from, but in reality there's a couple things. Is that because of the civility or lack of civility, is the officers don't necessarily want to be living in the community that they're working in and want people to know that they're law enforcement officers, because they bring that to their house. And it's one thing if you're treating me a certain way, but my family didn't sign up for this, and my kids didn't sign up for this, and so it's made perhaps a way for them to protect their families a little bit, and nobody knows who they are. The other thing is it really comes down to, we've all seen the housing, and public safety hasn't been you don't get into it for the money. And a lot of times our officers can't afford to live in the communities that they're working in. So those are things to look at too. And so those are just a couple thoughts that came up. But I do agree that if you aren't a part of the community, then how invested are you? And do you give the same level of service if you actually live there?
I think that's a great point. I think though, and Rob, I'll give you a couple seconds if you want to as well on that. But isn't there still a distance requirement? Don't you have to be within a certain mile from your jurisdiction of service because of response times?
It's all policy driven. There's no state law out there, and you'll find that when I hired on at Meridian, the chief said I could live wherever I wanted, but the drive time is on me. You start to see that policy in areas that have take-home cars. Cars are issued to them that they want you within a general response time of 20 to 30 minutes. And now with the gas prices the way they are, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do policy-wise, as far as they probably want their people that have those cars issued living as closest to the station as they possibly can. But it's all policy driven, and it's usually because of issued or take-home cars.
Gotcha. Rob, any thoughts before we go to the next one?
No, first off, I love Mark's profile picture of the skateboarder. That is awesome. It's near and dear to my heart, so I appreciate that. As our schedule, we do 48 hours on, 96 hours off, so we spend a third of our life in the community. I'm fortunate enough to live in Eagle. We just hired 12 firefighters, and it hurts that housing prices are so expensive, because they do want to live here, and there's a lot of them who are living with family, with their parents still, until they can save up enough money to afford a house. But to the question on the requirements, we've had to work with our cities, and I guess I'll use Ketchum as the example. They did have a requirement that you live in Ketchum if you want to work full time for the fire department, and at $45,000, $50,000 a year starting out, unless you have a spouse that makes a tremendous amount of money, I think they had 5 applicants for positions at their last hiring. That that is a lot to require. And as Jeff said, I think it's going to be more the policy on the vehicles that go home. But I'm very blessed to live in the community that I work in. I get to go to the store and I run into somebody every time. My wife says it's really annoying, but I think that it is a benefit to live in my community and also get to serve it. I have a very vested interest here with my kids at the schools, and that's my favorite part. I love going to the schools and doing fire prevention because I do know so many of the families here.
Right. Jeremy, do you want to highlight our next two?
Yeah, well, I love this. And I'm going to slaughter this name, but Shantane Winner. And she says that immense gratitude for Rob's leadership, his insight and initiative. It's so important. And respecting and grateful for our public sectors doing hard work to make our community safe in all aspects. So that's really nice to see that. It's appreciate you sharing that, Shantane. It's important to express gratitude, especially for those that sacrifice a lot and do a dangerous job to keep us safe. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Shantane. That's awesome. I appreciate her saying that.
Yeah.
All right. How about our last one, Jeremy?
Well, this says Ashton's page for civic engagement. And it says, could you please provide more context for this excellent and timely discussion? How do we learn more about In Search of Civility? And will the video be available after the live stream ends? And yes, In Search of Civility is something that we do. This year it's going to be, we started in April, we'll end in October. And every month on the third Monday of the month, we have In Search of Civility that third Monday at high noon. And all these streams are available at the Chamber's streaming sites. So our YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook page for the Boise Metro Chamber, as well as our very valuable media partners, the Idaho Statesman, Capital Sun, Idaho Press, and the Idaho Education News. So those will be available for viewing afterwards. If you want to share them or like them, and you know someone that you'd like to share the message with, please do feel free to share those with your networks.
And to wrap up today, we have one final question. I'm just wondering, Jeff and Rob, if you have any other thoughts that you wish citizens understood about your jobs, and if so, what would that be? What would you share with them?
Well, Kelly, I guess my final thought, and I gave this a little bit of thought, is just going to remind people that police officers are human too. We're oftentimes dealing with people in their most difficult of time, and in this scenario, no one's perfect. And mistakes are going to be made, and we just have to understand that, and that we're all trying to just do the best job that we possibly can out there. And nothing's really intentional or malicious on our part, but we do make errors, we do make mistakes, and that's how we learn, so we don't do them again. So I'll turn it over to Rob and see if he has any final thoughts.
No, I totally, Jeff, what you said I think is right. We are human, we make mistakes. The one thing I guess I would ask citizens to understand is, as we've had the surge of people moving into the state, we found ourselves, on scene longer, or we have back-to-back calls and there might be a delay sometimes getting to a person's house. And obviously we want to get there as quickly as possible. But as you see in the last couple months here, we have an emergency room shut down due to protesters and having to reroute ambulances to different places. We've had COVID. We've had our state, all of us have been impacted tremendously. And I think that, as Jeff said, we have to have grace and love for one another. And as a community that, I'll say it again, we try to be as proactive as we can, but a lot of times we're reactive, and working together with the community to get the message out when things are happening like that, I think is just communication is always our downfall. And how do we communicate more is having things like this, where you guys have hosted this event, and working together and understanding what we're working through is the first step.
Wonderful. Jeremy, do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to thank you both for being able to spend some of your time with us and talk about this issue. I love driving around town and seeing red and blue line flags to support our first responders. And I think we do live in a community that appreciates what you do and the risks that you take to keep our community safe. Thanks for doing what you do and for the time you spent today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I would echo that. Thank you so much, Jeff and Rob, for joining us for this important discussion today. And to all of you who tuned in to watch, we would also like to thank our partners, the Association of Idaho Cities and the Boise Metro Chamber, as well as our media partners, Idaho Ed News, the Idaho Statesman, the Idaho Press, and Capital Sun. We'll be back next month with another edition of In Search of Civility on July 18th. Stay tuned for details. We hope to see you then. Thanks, everyone.